Before wealth shows up in your bank account, it usually shows up in your habits. And if you've noticed some of these changes recently, you may be a lot closer to being financially free than you think. In this video, we're going to look at 10 hidden signs you're secretly getting rich. Not the flashy signs people post online, but the subtle behavioral shifts, mindset changes, and financial patterns that often appear long before visible wealth does. And one of these signs is so easy to overlook that many people don't realize it's happening until years later when the results finally become impossible to ignore. Sign 1. Your future self is starting to win arguments. One of the strangest things about building wealth is that it often starts with tiny decisions nobody sees. You walk into a store, you can afford something, you want it, and then you don't buy it. Not because you're cheap, not because you're scared, not because you can't. You simply decide that keeping the money serves you better than spending it. That might sound boring, but it's actually one of the most important psychological shifts in wealth creation. Researchers studying delayed gratification have consistently found that people who become financially successful are often better at prioritizing future rewards over immediate rewards. The interesting part is that this doesn't mean they have superhuman discipline. It means their future self becomes more real. Think about it. For many people, their future self feels like a stranger. Retirement is a stranger. 10 years from now is a stranger. Financial freedom is a stranger. And when a stranger asks you to sacrifice something today, it's easy to ignore them. But something changes when you're slowly transformed into getting richer. Your future self starts feeling like someone you actually care about. You stop asking, "What do I want right now?" and start asking, "What will make my life better later?" That's a completely different question. The purchase doesn't disappear, the desire doesn't disappear, but the decision-making process changes. And here's what most people miss. This isn't just a money skill, it's a brain skill. Because every time you choose a long-term benefit over a short-term impulse, you're strengthening neural pathways associated with self-control and future planning. You're literally training your brain to think differently. And by the end of this video, you'll see why this single shift quietly connects almost every other sign on this list. Sign 2. You care less about looking rich. This one surprises a lot of people. One of the strongest signs you're secretly getting rich is that you become less interested in appearing rich. Not more, less. When people are financially insecure, there's often a temptation to signal success. Expensive clothes, status purchases, luxury branding, lifestyle upgrades. Not because they're bad people, because humans naturally care about status. It's part of social psychology. But as genuine wealth starts growing, something interesting happens. The need for external proof often begins shrinking. You realize something important. The person with the newest phone isn't necessarily wealthier than the person investing consistently. The person driving the luxury car isn't necessarily wealthier than the person quietly building assets. The person posting vacation photos isn't necessarily wealthier than the person increasing their net worth every month. Real wealth and visible wealth are often very different things. In fact, studies on affluent households repeatedly find that many millionaires live surprisingly ordinary lifestyles, not because they have to, because they've learned that financial freedom creates more happiness than financial display. And that's a difficult lesson in a culture designed to reward appearances. You begin asking different questions. Instead of, "Will people be impressed?" you ask, "Will this improve my life?" That's a major shift, and it leads directly into the next sign. Because once appearances become less important, something else starts becoming more important: time. Sign 3. You protect your time more aggressively. Most people think wealth is about money, but wealthy people often become obsessed with something else: time. Because eventually you realize money can be earned back. Time cannot. When you're secretly getting richer, you start noticing situations where you're trading enormous amounts of time for very little value. Maybe it's endless scrolling, unnecessary drama, meetings that accomplish nothing, or constantly saying yes to things you don't actually want to do. At first, this looks unrelated to money, but it isn't. Economists call this opportunity cost. We have discussed this many times in earlier wealth-building videos of Simple Ways of Life. You can check the description for the wealth building playlist. Now, coming back to opportunity cost, Every choice automatically eliminates another choice. Every hour spent somewhere is an hour unavailable somewhere else. And once you start seeing opportunity costs clearly, your behavior changes. You become more intentional, more selective, and more protective of your attention. And attention is becoming one of the most valuable resources in the modern economy. Think about it. Entire industries are competing for your focus. Streaming services, apps, notifications, algorithms, advertisements. Everyone wants your attention because attention eventually turns into behavior, and behavior eventually turns into money. People who are secretly building wealth often start treating their attention like an asset because that's exactly what it is. And this creates another surprising effect. The more valuable your time becomes, the less attractive certain purchases become, which leads us to the next sign. Sign 4. Expensive things stop feeling impressive. The more financially mature people become, the harder it becomes to impress them with expensive stuff. Again, not because they're judging anyone, because they've learned how to calculate differently. Imagine someone shows you a $3,000 purchase. Most people see the item. Some admire, some envy. But someone developing financial intelligence often sees something else. They see alternatives, investments, future growth, compounding, opportunity costs. They don't just see what the money bought. They see what the money could have become. This is one of the most overlooked wealth principles. Every dollar has multiple possible futures. Spend it, save it, invest it, use it to learn a skill, use it to build a business, use it to solve a recurring problem. As you become more financially aware, you start seeing these hidden futures automatically, and suddenly many purchases lose their magic, not because you're denying yourself enjoyment, because your brain has started calculating differently. This is where wealth creation often becomes easier, because fewer purchases require self-control. The desire itself starts weakening. And that brings us to a sign that almost nobody talks about. A sign that often appears years before major financial success becomes visible. Sign 5. Your financial stress is becoming more specific. Most people assume less stress means more wealth, but that's not exactly what happens. The real shift is more interesting. Your financial stress becomes more specific. Let me explain. When people are struggling financially, stress tends to be broad. How will I pay my bills? What if something goes wrong? Can I afford this? Will I have enough? Everything feels uncertain, urgent, and connected. But as financial stability grows, those fears often become narrower. Instead of worrying about survival, you start thinking about optimization. Instead of worrying about next month, you think about 5 years from now. Instead of asking whether you'll be okay, you ask how to improve. That's a huge shift. And it usually happens gradually. Many people miss it entirely. They assume they're still struggling because they still experience financial concerns, but the nature of those concerns has changed. And that's progress, massive progress, because moving from survival thinking to strategy thinking is one of the strongest indicators that wealth is already being built beneath the surface. And the next sign might be the most powerful mental shift of all, because it changes how you see every dollar you earn. Sign 6. You've stopped thinking only about income. People spend years focused on one financial question. How can I make more money? And to be fair, that's an important question. Income matters a lot. But one of the clearest signs you're secretly getting rich is that you begin asking a different question. How can I make this money work harder than I do? At first, this sounds like something only wealthy investors talk about, but it actually starts much earlier, long before someone becomes financially independent, long before they have a large portfolio, long before they have 6 or 7 figures. The shift happens when you stop viewing money as something that only gets spent and start viewing it as something that can produce more money. Think about how most people treat income. Money comes in, bills go out, expenses happen, whatever remains gets spent somewhere else. The cycle repeats. There's nothing unusual about that. But people who gradually build wealth often create a small interruption in that cycle. Before spending every dollar, they ask, what percentage of this can become an asset? An asset doesn't have to be complicated. It could be an investment account, a retirement fund, a business, a skill that increases earning potential, a tool that saves hundreds of hours. An asset is simply something that continues producing value after you pay for it. This mindset changes everything because now every paycheck has two jobs: support today's life and improve tomorrow's life. And here's the interesting psychological effect. The moment money starts generating value independently, your relationship with work changes. You no longer feel like every future dollar depends entirely on your future effort. You begin building systems, and systems scale better than effort. That's why many financially successful people eventually become fascinated by leverage. Not because they're lazy, but they understand something most people don't: that effort is limited and systems are not. A person can only work so many hours, but investments compound, businesses grow, skills stack, processes improve, assets continue working. And once you start seeing the world this way, it's almost impossible to unsee it. Which brings us to another sign that's surprisingly emotional. Sign 7. You feel less pressure to keep up with other people. There was a time when many of us compared everything: cars, homes, vacations, job titles, gadgets, clothes, income, and that's understandable. Humans naturally compare. Psychologists call this social comparison theory. Our brains constantly evaluate where we stand relative to others. The problem is that comparison creates a moving target. No matter what you achieve, someone always has more: a bigger house, a newer car, a higher salary, a more impressive lifestyle. And if your happiness depends on winning that game, you never actually win. One of the hidden signs of growing wealth is that you slowly lose interest in competing. Not because you've given up, but you've realized it's a bad measurement system. Imagine two people. One earns $200,000 a year, but spends nearly all of it. The other earns $90,000, but consistently saves, invests, and builds assets. From the outside, the first person may appear wealthier, but appearances don't pay future bills. Appearances don't create freedom. Appearances don't reduce financial stress. Net worth and lifestyle signaling are not the same thing. Once you understand this deeply, comparison begins losing its power. You stop measuring your progress against someone else's highlight reel. You start measuring against your own trajectory. And that's incredibly freeing, because now improvement becomes personal, not competitive. You don't need to be ahead of everyone. You just need to be ahead of where you were last year. And that mindset often creates something surprisingly valuable: patience, which leads directly into the next sign. Sign 8. You're becoming more patient with results. One of the biggest reasons people struggle financially is that their expectations operate on the wrong timeline. We live in a world obsessed with speed. Fast food, instant delivery, same-day shipping, instant streaming, instant answers. And unfortunately, many people expect wealth to work the same way. They want immediate outcomes, immediate returns, immediate transformation. But wealth operates differently. Wealth rewards consistency more than intensity. And once you understand this, your behavior changes dramatically. Think about physical fitness. Nobody expects to go to the gym twice and suddenly become strong. Everyone understands that progress takes time. Yet many people invest for 6 months and feel disappointed, or learn a skill for 3 weeks and quit, or build a side project for a month and assume it isn't working. The wealthy mindset often begins when you stop demanding immediate proof. You start trusting processes. You understand compounding, not just financially, in skills, relationships, knowledge, health, business. Everything compounds. Reading 15 pages a day seems insignificant until it's thousands of pages later. Investing small amounts seems insignificant until years of growth accumulate. Practicing a skill seems insignificant until you become unusually competent. Most breakthroughs look invisible while they're happening. That's the nature of compounding. And people who are secretly getting rich start recognizing invisible progress. They stop needing constant evidence, stop restarting every month, stop chasing every new shortcut. They become boringly consistent. And consistency is often where wealth hides. But there's another sign that's even more practical. It's something you can notice in everyday life. Sign 9. Emergencies are becoming inconveniences instead of disasters. This sign doesn't get enough attention because it isn't flashy. Nobody posts about it. Nobody brags about it. But it may be one of the most meaningful indicators of financial progress. Imagine your car suddenly needs repairs, or an appliance breaks, or an unexpected bill arrives. For many people, these situations create immediate panic. Not because they're irresponsible, but their financial margin is extremely thin. Every surprise feels dangerous. Every unexpected expense creates stress. Every setback threatens stability. But as wealth slowly grows, something changes. Problems don't disappear. Life still happens. Things still break. Unexpected costs still appear. The difference is your ability to absorb them. The emergency becomes inconvenient, not catastrophic. And that distinction is enormous, because financial security isn't really about buying luxury. It's about reducing fragility. Think about that. Many people imagine wealth as gaining things: bigger houses, nicer cars, expensive experiences. But often the first benefit of wealth is simply resilience. The ability to handle surprises without panic. The ability to recover quickly. The ability to make decisions without fear constantly sitting in the background. That's a form of freedom that rarely gets advertised. Yet it's one of the most valuable outcomes money can provide. And if you've experienced this shift recently, even in a small way, you're probably further along than you think. Now let's talk about the final sign, the one that quietly connects all the others. Sign 10. You no longer see wealth as a number. This might be the biggest mindset shift of all. People start their financial journey believing wealth is a number, a specific income, a specific savings account balance, a specific net worth. And there's nothing wrong with having targets. Goals matter. But over time, many financially successful people discover something surprising. Wealth isn't primarily a number. It's a collection of capabilities. It's about flexibility. The flexibility to handle unexpected problems. The flexibility to wait for the right opportunity. The flexibility to make decisions based on what matters most rather than what feels urgent in the moment. It's the confidence that comes from knowing a setback won't destroy your progress. It's the patience to think in years instead of weeks. And it's the discipline to choose long-term benefits over short-term impulses. Those qualities are the reason people become wealthy in the first place. And interestingly, most of those abilities existed before the money showed up. The results arrive later. The behavior changes first. The bank account catches up later. This is one of the most misunderstood truths about wealth. People often look at successful individuals and focus on what they have. But the more important question is how they think. Because the thinking produced the behavior produced the outcomes, and the outcomes eventually became visible wealth. In many cases, by the time someone looks rich, the process that created that wealth has already been happening for years. Quietly, behind the scenes, without recognition, without applause, without obvious signs. Which is exactly why this video exists, because many people are making real progress and don't realize it. They're waiting for some dramatic moment, some giant financial milestone, some life-changing event, when in reality, wealth is usually built through hundreds of small decisions that barely seem important at the time, until one day they are. If you noticed several of these signs in your own life, there's a good chance you're doing better than you think. Maybe you're becoming more patient. Maybe you're spending more intentionally. Maybe you're protecting your time. Maybe you're thinking long-term. Maybe you're building assets. Maybe emergencies don't scare you the way they used to. Those changes may not look impressive on social media, but they matter, because these are often the exact behaviors that create lasting wealth. The important thing is not whether you're rich today. It's whether your daily actions are moving you closer to financial freedom tomorrow. And if they are, you're already on a path that many people never find. If you found this video genuinely useful, consider giving it a like and subscribing to Simple Ways of Life. It helps the channel reach more people who want practical, evidence-based ideas for building a better life. And I'd love to know, which sign surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments.